Did you hear anything in there that convinces you?
You asked Dan what I meant by woo-woo. That is the very embodiment of woo-woo. He said, stringing together at a rapid patter of a bunch of scientific sounding words sprinkled in with some spiritual New Age words doesn't mean anything. I mean, just take one example of this non-local quantum effects. We're all connected. No, this is not true. When quantum physicists talk about non-locality and the interconnectedness of things, they're talking about things at the quantum level.
Wait, well, let me just stop you for a second, because I will play the dummy tonight, because it's not a hard role for me to assume. What does non-local mean? I mean, I kind of understand what quantum physics means, but just give it to me really simply.
Okay. There's this very simple two-slit experiment where you fire these photons through, and if you just have two streams of light, they form a little interference wave pattern, like throwing two rocks in a pond.
You've already confused.
Okay, and so it. Yeah, you want to interrupt?
He's getting into the woo-woo now.
No, this is just you. Okay, what he means by
guys with woo-woo.
What he means by non-local. What he means by non-local is that everything in the universe is interconnected, and it just is not true. It just isn't.
And there's no reason to think that it's active at the level of the brain. That non-locality is a principle that is working. Hold on, Deepak, you spoke for quite some time. The deeper point to make here, and what is...
But I want to address that brain thing that you just said.
Okay,
let's finish.
You might not have to, because the deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist, and basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject. Please don't take this as ad hominem. I mean, I'm talking about specifically what you said. But the fact, what you do, and what many people who try to invoke spooky physics do in the service of propping up their religious and New Age intuitions, is that they think that because what you're saying, because quantum mechanics is spooky and difficult to understand, and because what you're saying is spooky and difficult to understand, they must somehow be related, or they must somehow be mutually supportive. And that's just fundamentally not true. They are arrived at by completely different methodologies and ways of thinking and criteria of discursive evidence. What a mystic, I've studied with great mystics. I've met great meditation masters who've spent 20 years in caves perfecting the kinds of techniques of meditation that you would adopt or recommend. They don't know a damn thing about physics. And they're not interested, for the most part, in physics. I mean, there's nothing about sitting in a cave and granted, having incredibly useful and even normative experiences and transforming your way of life and transforming your moment-to-moment perception of the world. There's nothing about that project that makes you a theoretical physicist. And so these are completely different language games. They're completely, and you have just merge them together in a very unprincipled way, and you're getting away with it.
No, I take resentment at your questioning my scientific credentials. In fact, if anyone on this stage is more scientifically credentialed, it's me. I took physics, chemistry, biology. I'm an MD. I'm a neuroendocrinologist, and I want to object to your saying that brain does not obey non-locality. When you're thinking right now, 100 trillion neurons are phase locking and frequency locking simultaneously. Is that non-locality or not?
Okay, can I just stop?
I just want to quote from Einstein: "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." From Stephen Hawking: "It would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us.
But Hawking's
Please-
an atheist.
please
They're using
look
This
up
is
those-
a direct quote.
So what? He has stated, Hawking has stated on this very stage, he does not believe in God.
Why, he doesn't believe in the dead white male that you're talking about, the straw man that you have put up, or the mythical God that Sam Harris is
The
talking
God
about.
you put up is a meaningless, non-local God. What
No,
does that even
I
mean?
just said this is also the God that gives us inspiration, insight, creativity, free will, conscious choice making, imagination. Are your neurons doing that, or are you doing that?
As just a point of process here,
Well,
could you
then you're a
could you
zombie.
dial it down just a little bit? First of all, I invite everyone to look up that Einstein quote in Ideas and Opinions. Read it in context. It'll be absolutely obvious. It can't be pressed into the service that you just witnessed. Einstein complained about this treatment of his metaphorical use of the word God and the few things he said about religion. And you can look that up in Richard Dawkins' book. This is a game. And it's a game that is designed for export to people who don't know much science and don't know how science is done. And you missed the point of, I wasn't criticizing your scientific credentials. You're an endocrinologist, you're an MD, you're not a theoretical physicist. The way science is done is
I invite theoretical physicists in this audience to actually address these questions.
Okay, so a theoretical physicist will be comfortable talking with real confidence in a very narrow band of his expertise, and he will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that when he's in a room like this, or she, sorry. I'll just proceed with he just for simplicity's sake here. He will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that whenever he opens his mouth in a room like this, he is guaranteed to be speaking in front of half a dozen people who know more on any given issue than he does. The great irony of the popular conception of science as arrogant is that when you go to a scientific meeting, you don't see arrogance. I mean, you're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. I mean, this is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing.
If I was worried about being embarrassed, I wouldn't be actually influencing the people that I'm influencing. And I can also say something right now is that I agree that, science is about a very specific methodology, but for people like Michael, not you so much, but people like Michael, to take all of inner experience, all of the rich inner experience, and try to codify it in a graph with data is absurd.
As opposed to what? Just calling it fuzzy words? How does that help us understand
That's such an out,
No.
Michael. That's such an out.
And one
use
technical,
the words fuzzy,
all right.
use the words woo-woo, and you're out of the argument.
I'll give you a technical explanation. When you talk about the observer effect and the uncertainty principle, this is how subatomic particles are altered by looking at them, by bombarding them with light, for example, because they're so small. And so you look at it or you don't look at it, and that changes the nature of what you're looking at. But the moon is really there whether you look at it or not. It doesn't apply to the macro world.
In the absence of a conscious entity, the moon remains a radically ambiguous and ceaselessly flowing quantum soup.
Deepak, that is...
That you have to have a conscious being.
The moon?
Yes.
Okay, listen to the sounds.
You have been... let's just say, dismissive of what Deepak has said thus far about the notion that there is something more than this. How can you be so sure that there isn't? And I know it's hard to prove a negative, if not impossible. But give me some evidence to support your contention that this is it.
Well, for example, I can't prove that there isn't something else that I don't know that there isn't. Huh? I mean, it's like the difference between something invisible and something non-existent. Well, it's zero and we can't study it. But if you take something specific like Gene's excellent comment there, we actually have a pretty good scientific understanding now based on evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology that if you expand the circle of sentiments to include other people as honorary members of your tribe, you're less likely to kill them. And so, like, for example, tried and true game theory kind of data in the real world of opening up economic borders, you're less likely to bomb countries that make your cars and computers. That's a form of trade that makes you feel like somebody else is an honorary member of your tribe. Well, that has very deep evolutionary reasons that we've now come to understand in just the last few decades by applying the methods of science to something with a real social consequences. And we can derive that from data and tests and game theory models and so forth. So just in terms of what we can operationally define carefully so that we're all talking about the same thing and then go measure it or test it or experiment with it or try it. I mean, one of the great things about democracy, liberal democracy, it's kind of a scientific experiment. Let's try this, let's try that. This state has this taxation system, this one has that taxation system. It's like an experiment. And so I think what you described, Gene, as the expanding circle of sentiments to include women is a result of the Enlightenment experiment that let's try that. Let's see if that produces greater prosperity and wealth and happiness and joy for more people in more places, and it worked. And that's a rational, reasonable approach.
One thing I'd like to add to that is I think it's ironic to score women's rights for your side of the ledger here in this conversation, because there's been no greater obstacle to empowering women in human history than religion. Certainly the three monotheists. I mean, when you...
Sam, to my ear at least, neither Gene nor Deepak is advocating religion as you understand it.
That's true, and that's why I said what I said at the beginning. That the issue here, I mean, what kind of conversation should we have, and how will this conversation be construed by people in the audience, by people seeing this on television? And the reality is that the kind of talk and the kind of invocations of science that Deepak is offering here is received by a great number of people who believe a lot of unjustified, very myth-laden stuff that has been handed down to us.
You're making that statement without qualifying it, without giving any proof of it. Give me some proof that what I'm saying is what he says is woo-woo, just because he can't understand it.
Okay.
Every discipline has its vocabulary.
It's okay. If you're going to say that non-locality is an operable principle in neuroscience, that is woo-woo right now in neuroscience.
It's a principle in morphogenesis and differentiation. It's a principle in the workings of the pacemaker of your heart, where 100 pacemaker cells fire simultaneously, non-locally.
Saying it louder and relentlessly is not going to make it true.